Anthony Stein here for the Rigid Catholic Nerd podcast to give you a review of The Meg 2, The Trench. My wife and I went to see The Meg 2. She'll have on her channel, Forgotten Hollywood, a review of her own where she'll go into some more humorous details than I'm going to here. Instead, I'm going to give you what I first up front with the sort of Christian and Catholic, should you be able to watch this movie if sort of details. There's certain deal breakers that your priests or your ministers should tell you that for a movie, and one of them is going to be the Lord's name in vain. Now, ultimately, you make your own decisions. I'm not going to chastise anybody for watching movies that have bad things in them. That's up to you. Those are decisions you make for yourself. And so I can happily report to you that I did not catch a single instance of blasphemy in the movie. No using our Lord's name in vain. Good job on the filmmakers. There were some, as is always the case in these movies, there is a beach scene with people in bathing suits. If that's something you can't handle in a movie, be forewarned. Although I would imagine you can tell that a shark movie is going to have that kind of thing in it because, well, The Meg was a movie about some explorers testing a theory that the Marianas Trench, what we consider to be the floor of the Marianas Trench, wasn't actually the floor, that it was actually sort of a weird cloud thing, and that kept the ocean as we understood it separate from whatever was below it. And their hypothesis was correct in the movie. They called it the thermocline, that barrier, and they broke through it, and there was a enormous, underwater prehistoric sea down there. And megalodons were down there. Megalodons being these 70-meter sharks, size of school buses, can swallow people whole, kind of fish were down there. And when they escaped during their exploration, one followed them. And actually, in the first movie, two followed them. Big old shark movie, PG-13 rating for the first one, just like this one. The first movie starred Jason Statham and a host of Chinese actors. Same with this film. And I'll get to that, actually, here, because that's something I want to talk about, because the success of this film, I think everybody is missing an important factor here. But does this movie do what it needs to do? Yes. The movie actually knows what it's supposed to do. The movie knows that it's going to be a dumb action movie starring Jason Statham with a giant prehistoric shark as I'm not going to call the shark in The Meg 2 the villain, because they're actual villains in the movie. And a villain sort of suggests that somebody's got free will and a sort of, intent to what they're doing, and an animal doesn't have those things. And they're actually, again, human villains in this movie, unlike in the first Meg. So does this movie do what it needs to do to be entertaining? Yes, this is a typical popcorn, dumb summer action movie. You go watch it, you have a good time, you laugh at the absurdity of what you're watching, because it's a spectacle, and then you're done. The movie doesn't exactly have even a lot of blood in it, because the sharks are so large that when they're going after people, they're just gone. Right. Anytime that you see blood on the screen is generally because the shark is going after another shark of its own size or some other mega creature. So I'm going to talk briefly about, and I want to see if I can do a live stream, at least with Ryan, because Odin, as you may know, if you watch his regular content, you know that Odin from OMB Reviews is busy because his day job is being a school teacher, and school's now in session for him, or will be shortly. So he's very busy. So if we can't get him, I want to at least maybe do a live stream with Ryan Grant to talk about what makes a good shark movie. And the reason I'll give you, a preview of what makes a good shark movie here. Every shark movie ever made lives in the shadow of Jaws, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And it's not because of the horror aspect of it. I actually like horror movies. Jaws is first and foremost a movie about a group of men from very different backgrounds, some of whom don't like each other at all, putting aside their personal differences to protect their community from an existential threat. The threat plays out on screen for you in lurid detail, masterfully filmed by Steven Spielberg. Every shark movie in history lives in the shadow of that movie, to the point where so many shark movies actually do nods to Jaws in them. They, the Meg movies do this. Both Meg movies have a dog named Pippet. Have you ever seen Jaws? Do you remember that scene where there's a guy on the beach having his, playing catch with his dog? That dog's name was Pippet. And the dog, of course, disappears. You don't see what happened to it. Presumably Bruce the shark got him. The Meg movies both have a dog named Pivot, same breed, although owned by rich people who do ridiculously silly things to their fur, and they feature prominently because it's sort of a nod to Jaws. But every shark movie ever made lives in the shadow of Jaws. And what ends up happening is every shark movie ever made either tries to be another Jaws, whether on a low budget or a high budget, or tries to do something else. And herein where your problem comes. Most of those filmmakers are not going to be of the caliber of Steven Spielberg in his prime. Spielberg, his streak of excellent films started with Jaws in 1975 and went into like the 1990s, early 2000s, okay? 25 to 30 year hot streak is pretty good for most filmmakers. He's one of those filmmakers that people will be talking about long after he's gone. Whereas the guy who made a movie like The Reef is not, or Deep Blue Sea. My wife and I have this thing where during the summer we like to watch bad shark movies. Emphasis on bad. Okay. So there's another way you can do a shark movie though. And that's either to try to do something different. I don't like when shark movies are made to be just overt horror movies. So, for example, 47 Meters Down, I think, is not a good shark movie because they're really rely on modern shark movie or modern monster movie tropes, which is like jump scares, lots and lots of jump scares, and the violence is really over the top, which is not something I also care for. So yeah, I didn't like. Plus, the psychological aspects of 47 Meters Down was not good for me. So the other way you can do a shark movie successfully is the Sharknado method, which is to make it ridiculous. And I say Sharknado, if you have not seen Sharknado, it was made for TV by the Sci-Fi Channel, a channel I hate. I can't stand the Sci-Fi Channel. When I was a kid, Sci-Fi Channel debuted, and they had all these wonderful, like, classic science fiction shows as their mainstay. I miss that Sci-Fi Channel. Most of their original programming is terrible, but the exception to the rule is Sharknado, which is terrible, but done so on purpose. Sharknado knew exactly what it was when the filmmakers made it, and they leaned into it. I mean, it's a movie about a tornado filled with sharks on a rampage, right? You can't take that movie seriously. The Meg does not try to be Jaws. It does tip its hat to Jaws at some times. But what it does and does well is do something ridiculous. I almost think they purposely went after Jason Statham to be the star. Because Jason Statham movies are on their face ridiculous. They are borderline silly action movies, right? Some of them I can't recommend because of impurity in them, like Crank, But he's known as kind of the comical action hero. And I don't mean like himself being comical, because he is very gravely serious in his movies, but there's just absurd things happening around him. Or the scenarios are absurd, like such is the case with the Meg. And it does it well. I will tell you right now that this movie is different very much so than the first Meg, because the first Meg is pretty much a straight shark movie, except with two giant sharks that escape captivity. This is something a little bit different. As my wife describes in her review on her channel, it's basically Jaws meets Die Hard meets James Bond meets Jurassic Park. Well, that sounds appealing to you because it's starring Jason Statham and it's on its face absurd. Highly recommend. But the other thing here is something no one is talking about with this movie, because we're seeing the projections that it's going to make like $23 million, quote, domestically here. The United States is not the domestic market for the Meg. The movie is distributed in the U.S. by Warner Brothers, but Warner Brothers didn't make this movie. So if this movie, quote, flops in the U.S. or flops in general, this is not on Warner Brothers, other than for the marketing. This movie was made by CMC. That is a Chinese film company. This is where the talk of how much money this movie is going to make really needs to come in, because this is a Chinese movie. Half the cast of the first Meg and like half the cast of the second are Chinese actors and actresses. This is going to be a movie that is guaranteed a release in China. It's probably going to be heavily marketed by CMC in China, as well as Singapore and Thailand and other places in Southeast Asia. Because, well, I mean, the whole premise of the Meg is that the sharks escaped the Marianas Trench, which is in the South Pacific. So China is a logical place for this film to be made, but it's also made by a Chinese company. So how do the rules work for this? I don't know. I don't know exactly how like budgeting transparency works for movies like The Meg, which are made by a Chinese company. But this is going to this movie should do very, very well in China. The actors and actresses are all fairly recognizable Chinese actors and actresses, as I understand it. I'm not a big fan of Chinese cinema, except for some really iconic martial arts films. But aside from that, I don't know. But when you see this not do too well in America, remember America's not the domestic release for it, though clearly it was made for the American market. So in America, it's not going to do terribly well. But it's going up against Barbie and Oppenheimer, which are still dominating the box office. It's probably going to do much better than Disney's Haunted Mansion. Again, to borrow a line from our friend Odin, couldn't happen to a nicer company. And it's going to pass Sound of Freedom. I don't know if it'll be number 3 at the box office this weekend or not, because it's going up against a Ninja Turtles movie that's projected to do better than The Meg, although that Ninja Turtles movie to me looks atrocious. As a fan of the Ninja Turtles from my childhood, I saw the live action movies when I was a kid. No interest whatsoever in a politicized, terribly, just what they've done to the Lord for that is just atrocious. Midnight's Edge, I think it was, had a review of it. You should go check that out. They did a live stream. But in general, I can recommend this movie. It's a Chinese film with a targeted American release, starring Jason Statham. The language is weirdly clean. I didn't catch anything. And even the CGI violence is just CGI violence. It's like not even real looking. And although they do a good job of hiding some of the CGI behind practical effects, like there's a scene where a actual like building is being taken apart by the shark, and they use the actual churning of real water to hide some of the CGI of the shark, which is very masterfully done. Hollywood could take a note from this movie on how to actually blend CGI with practical effects, because if that movie had been made by, say, Disney, they would have made the structure the shark was taking apart out of CGI too, regardless of the fact that there was an actor on that CGI platform trying to look like they were really trying to escape a shark. So I think this is is this a great film that people will talk about decades from now in the same way of Jaws? Should this win awards? No. It's a dumb action movie designed to sell popcorn to you. If that sounds like something you want to watch, go watch The Meg. Anyway, let me know what you thought of this in the comments, please. And hit that like and subscribe button. It does help. Anyway, thanks for your time today.